Story 1. The Trail That Faded Behind Me. I used to hike the ridge above Hazard when I needed quiet. It wasn't much of a trail, just a cut through the brush where deer had worn the ground smooth and the same handful of locals had carried their boots across for years. The ridge wasn't tall, nothing like the peaks to the east, but it gave me space to breathe. If I timed it right, I could make the round trip in an hour and be back home before the shadows reached my yard. I'd walked it so many times I didn't even think of it as a hike anymore. Just a kind of reset. A path that always curved back toward the road like a loop pulled tight. That evening the fog was heavier than I'd ever seen. It rolled down low over the tree line so thick it made the world smaller, and every sound felt muted, like the air itself was wool. Still, I wasn't worried. I knew the route blind. At the old split oak, the one with its trunk torn open by lightning years ago, I made my usual turn, expecting the trail to lead me down toward the gravel road where I'd parked. But when I looked back, the path was gone. No footprints, no trampled grass, not even the narrow scar of earth I'd followed for years. It was as though the ridge had healed itself shut behind me. I told myself I'd just wandered a few feet wide of the bend, that the fog had swallowed my bearings. I pressed forward. The ground dipped, as it always did, sloping toward what should have been the road. But every step deepened the silence. Even the birds had gone still. My compass, which I carried out of habit more than need, spun slow circles under the glass, needle twitching like it couldn't decide where north was. I stopped and tried calling out, a sharp hello to no one, just to break the weight of the quiet. The sound didn't echo, it didn't carry, it sank at my feet like I'd never spoken. I thought of breadcrumbs then, the old trick I used as a boy. I stripped bits of bark and dropped them every few yards. But each time I glanced back, the pieces were gone. Not shifted by wind, not lost in leaves. Gone. The forest floor lay smooth as if nothing had passed through at all. I pressed my boots hard into the mud, leaving deep imprints. When I turned around, even those had vanished, the earth looking untouched. A place like that makes you start questioning your own weight, your own presence. I slapped my arms, stomped my feet, just to hear proof I was still there. I walked until my legs shook, trying to keep steady, but the ridge seemed endless. The split oak was gone, though I circled until I swore I'd covered every slope. The fog pressed lower, wrapping the trees in pale cloth. At times I thought I saw shapes moving inside it, long stretches of shadow that weren't trees standing too still, too watchful. Each time I tried to focus, the fog folded them away. I told myself it was just the mind, tired and panicked, but I didn't believe it, not fully. At some point I dropped to the ground, pressing my palm flat into the soil, trying to feel direction in the slope. My hand came away damp, smelling of moss and stone. The silence carried a faint hum then, not like wind or water, but something steady, like wires singing when they are under tension. I thought maybe there were power lines near, though I knew none had ever been strung across that ridge. I followed the hum until it disappeared, then circled back and found it again. It felt like being toyed with, like the woods were tugging me around on a line. The fog thickened into night, though I never saw the sun fall. My watch slowed and then stopped altogether, the second hand twitching back and forth at the same place. My chest hurt with each breath. I hadn't packed for more than a short walk, no water, no light, but a matchbook in my pocket. I lit one match to test the dark, and the flame curled small, dim, as if it were fighting for air. In that glow, I saw the nearest tree, its bark smooth where it should have been rough, as though the details had been erased. I thought then that maybe the ridge wasn't meant to be walked after dark, that some paths aren't roads but boundaries, and once crossed, they don't let you back. I sat in the dirt, shaking, and begged aloud, half to God, half to the woods themselves, for a way out. I don't know how long I knelt there. My eyes blurred with tears I hadn't realized I'd shed, and the fog pressed so close it was like kneeling in a damp room. When I finally stood, I staggered forward, and without warning, gravel crunched under my boots. I was on the road, no slope, no clearing. It was just there, as if I'd stepped through a doorway. The night was deep by then, stars muted by haze, but the road was solid. My truck sat waiting, its hood beaded with dew. I climbed inside and drove off without looking back, though I swear the fog trailed me, thinning only after I hit town. I never hiked that ridge again. Some evenings, when fog lays low over the trees, I catch myself glancing toward it, wondering if the trail is still there, or if it closed for good the moment I left. In dreams, I see it waiting, the same thick fog, patient and heavy, asking me to step back into it. And when I wake, there's a weight in the air, a silence that feels like the woods are still holding their breath, still waiting for me to lose mine. Story 2. The cabin lights beyond the hollow. I cut through that hollow near Big Stone Gap because it was quicker than following the switchback road. Folks said the place had gone quiet since the mine closed. Nothing left but slag piles and blackberry bramble, but I liked the shortcut. It was always damp down there, the air cooler, shadows hanging on even when the ridges above glowed with evening light. That day, I was late getting home, and the sky had already turned grey when I dropped into the hollow. I hadn't gone 100 yards before I saw it. A soft amber glow seeping between the trees, low and steady. At first I thought it was a lantern, maybe someone poaching or a camp set up by hunters. But as I crept closer, I realized the light wasn't moving. It was fixed, coming from the windows of a cabin I'd never seen before. The shutters were drawn, but the glow leaked around their edges, pulsing slow, as though a fire inside was breathing. My grandfather had lived his whole life in those hills. He used to walk me along the ridges, pointing at old foundations swallowed by ivy, naming who'd built them. He swore no cabins stood in that hollow, not for 50 years. Folks cleared out after the mine shut, he'd told me. No one lives down there. Nothing grows right. His words came back as I stood staring at that house where none should have been. I circled wide at first, keeping to the brush. The cabin looked sound, not sagged or rotted. Chairs stood neatly under the porch. Through the thin cracks of the shutters I thought I saw a table set for supper, plates catching the glow. It didn't make sense. Even new hunting camps looked rough, pieced together from scrap tin and plywood. This place looked old but tended, as though someone had been waiting. The stillness hit me next. No dogs barked, no crickets, no frogs, not even the distant roll of the creek that always threaded the hollow. The woods had gone hollow themselves, a silence that pressed in close. I shifted on my boots, and the sound of my own movement felt too loud, foreign, like it didn't belong in that space. I told myself to leave it be. Folks get protective of land, and maybe I'd stumbled on some camp no one wanted known. I turned to go back the way I'd come, but the trail bent me wrong. A few steps later, I was standing at the edge of the porch, boards pale under the light, my hand resting on the rail without memory of reaching for it. My boots sank into soil too soft, as if the ground had been freshly turned. It gave under my weight like a bed or a grave. I froze, stomach twisting. The light inside swelled, brighter now, pressing against the shutters in waves. It wasn't flicker, it wasn't flame, it was steady, breathing in and out as if the whole house inhaled. I leaned back, one foot ready to bolt, and the boards of the porch creaked in answer, not once, not twice, but 3 times, like someone pacing slow just beyond the door. I whispered hello, My voice sounded cracked, too thin. No answer came, but the light surged with my words, spilling between the shutters. I thought I saw shapes moving behind the glow, shoulders and heads bending over the set table. The smell reached me then, wood smoke, but older, layered with something sweet and cloying, like preserves left to spoil. I stumbled down off the porch, heart hammering, and pushed into the brush. Branches whipped my arms. I didn't care. I forced my way through until I found a break, lungs heaving, and when I looked up, I was back at the porch again. The same chairs, the same soil sinking under my feet. The woods had folded me back. Panic tore through me. I ran. I didn't choose a direction, I just moved. Roots caught my boots. Branches clawed my face, but I didn't stop. The glow followed, pulsing behind the trees, not fading no matter how far I went. It was always there, just ahead or just behind, like the cabin carried itself with me. My breath turned ragged, chest burning. I cried out for help, though I knew no one would hear. When I finally stumbled into the gravel of the road, I collapsed hard enough to scrape my palms raw. My truck sat only a few yards away, waiting under a veil of mist. The hollow lay dark behind me, no glow, no sound, just trees. I scrambled inside and started the engine, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. I didn't look back until I reached the highway. At home, I saw the time. My watch, which I'd checked before stepping into the hollow, had lost 3 hours. My phone said the same. I'd been gone long enough for the night to settle deep, though I remembered nothing but running, nothing but that glow pressing closer each time I tried to leave. I told no one at first. My grandfather had already passed, and I didn't want folks thinking I'd spooked myself with his stories. But in the weeks that followed, I checked. I drove past the hollow, peered through the trees. No cabin, no trail leading to one. The whole place was choked with laurel and briar so thick you couldn't force your way 20 yards. Whatever I'd seen wasn't there anymore, maybe never was. Still, on certain nights, when the fog presses low and the moon hides, I swear I catch a faint glow pulsing under the branches. Not firelight, not lanterns. A breath in the dark, steady as a heartbeat, waiting for someone to notice. And I wonder if I ever truly left, or if part of me is still sitting at that table in a cabin no one built, where the silence breathes and the ground never lets go. Story 3. The Voice That Borrowed My Name. I grew up near Spruce Fork, and the woods there had a way of playing with sound. You'd hear a twig snap off to your left when the squirrel that made it was perched 50 feet above, or a crow would call across the ridge, but you'd swear it came from right behind your shoulder. My uncle used to say the hills had hollow bones, and the noises just rattled through until they spilled out where they weren't meant to. I never thought much of it, not until the evening when the woods decided to give my voice back to me. It was late fall, just before the air turns sharp enough to bite. My uncle and I had been walking the ridge all afternoon with our 22S, waiting for the grey squirrels to settle down. By dusk, my hands were cold, the light was slipping away, and the woods were heavy with that stillness that comes right before dark. I was about to say we should pack it in when I heard my name, low, almost like a friend calling me from behind a tree. I turned quick, rifle raised, but what I heard next stopped me. It was me, my own voice, worn out and tired, calling my name again like I was answering myself. The tone was exact, down to the rasp I get after a long day. My uncle stiffened. He didn't joke, didn't say a word. He just raised his hand sharp, the way you do when you want absolute silence, and his face had gone pale. The voice came again, closer now. My name followed by 2 words that made my stomach turn, come down. It wasn't a command. It was coaxing, gentle, almost kind, the way you'd call a child down from a tree. The woods pressed in then, leaning closer, and I felt like the air itself wanted me to answer. I didn't. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my ears. My uncle shook his head and started backing away slow, his boots careful on the leaves. I followed, but the voice called again, steady as ever, urging me to step closer, to step down. Each time I didn't respond, the trees seemed to breathe heavier, as if disappointed. We made it to the old service road without running, though every muscle in me wanted to bolt. Even then, the voice trailed us, repeating my name, softer with distance but never gone. It wasn't until we reached the truck that the road swallowed the sound whole. My uncle lit a cigarette with shaking hands and said only one thing: "Don't answer when the woods borrow your name." I tried to shrug it off, told myself it was echo, some trick of the ridges. But when I lay in bed that night, the silence in my house felt wrong, stretched thin. I swore I could hear a faint whisper just outside, dragging my name along the siding like fingers on wood. I didn't sleep. The next week I stayed clear of the ridge, but the memory clung. My uncle never spoke of it again, not even when I tried to bring it up. He'd just shake his head and change the subject. A man who'd lived his whole life in those hills, who'd buried brothers and friends taken by mine. Collapses, refused to name what we'd heard. That scared me more than the voice itself. Still, habits are hard to break. A month later, against better judgment, I carried my rifle back towards Spruce Fork, alone. The snow hadn't come yet, but the woods were brittle with frost. I walked slow, ears straining for any sound that might betray a squirrel. At first, all I heard was the usual, leaves settling, crows bickering overhead. Then, as the light slanted low, I heard it again. My name, low and certain, as if spoken through my own lips. The voice was patient, waiting. Then it said more. "Come down." This way. I felt the pull in my chest, a tug that made my legs want to step forward, down the slope where the laurel thicket tangled dark. The way it spoke, it wasn't threatening. It sounded like relief. Like whoever was calling had been waiting a long time for me to finally listen. My throat burned with the urge to answer, but I bit it back and forced myself uphill, every step fighting that pull. The voice followed. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, but always near enough to touch if I gave in. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It just repeated my name over and over, wrapping me in something soft and heavy. When I broke onto the road again, the silence slammed back into place like a door shutting. I didn't go back after that. I couldn't. My uncle never asked why I stopped hunting, but I think he knew. The ridge kept whatever it wanted, and it had started calling me by name. I avoided Spruce Fork, avoided even driving the road that passed it. But here's the truth. Staying away didn't stop it. On still nights, when the wind slips low through the timber, I hear it again. My voice, weary, coaxing me to come down. It drifts through the cracks of my house, slips under the door, hums in the walls like the bones of the ridge carried it here. I never answer, I never will, but I can feel it waiting. Patient, steady, certain that one day I'll step back into the trees and finally listen. Story 4. The Man Sitting on the Log. I was driving the Blue Ridge Parkway alone, taking the long way to clear my head. Late October. Trees lit up in flame red and brittle gold, mist curling low across the hollows. That stretch between Craggy Gardens and Mount Mitchell always felt a little off to me. Something about the way the ridges lean in on you, like the road was only tolerated by the land, not welcomed. I'd passed the turnout for an old overlook when I noticed a side road cut sharp into the slope. Narrow, rough, barely wide enough for a truck. No sign, no gate, just a break in the brush that looked like it remembered wheels. Curiosity or boredom, I don't know which made me stop. I pulled off, grabbed my coat and started walking up. The air was damp, the kind of cold that sits on your skin, fog moved in veins through the trees, and the ground was soft with moss and fallen pine. After about 5 minutes, I came to a bend where the road leveled out briefly before climbing again. That's where I saw him, a man sitting on a fallen log, dark with moss. He was hunched, elbows on knees, wearing a coat that looked like it belonged in an old photo, canvas worn smooth and dull, one shoulder stitched clumsily with black thread. He didn't look up when I came near, didn't even flinch when I said, "Evening," just sat there, staring down at his hands or the dirt or nothing at all. I kept walking slower now. Something about him sat wrong, not threatening, not even strange on the surface, but too still. Not even his breath showed in the mist. After 10 minutes or so, I looked back. The bend was gone behind the ridge, nothing but trees in the path behind me. I shook it off, kept walking, counting steps, counting switchbacks. The slope steepened, and I paused to catch my breath. That's when I saw him again. Same log, same man, bent posture, same coat, sleeves bunched at the wrist like they were a size too big. He sat maybe 20 feet ahead now, just off the side of the road like he'd never moved. I hadn't heard a sound, no footsteps, no rustling. I called out again, louder this time, but he didn't move. I backed up a few steps, heartbeats starting to thump in my ears. Thought maybe it was a trick of the trail looping back, or someone messing with me. But the road hadn't doubled. There was only one bend, and I hadn't passed it again. I turned around, started walking back the way I'd come. After a while, I glanced to the side, and there he was, sitting ahead, lower on the trail now, closer, still hunched, still still. It didn't make sense. I stopped walking, just stared. He didn't look at me, not even a flicker of recognition, but I felt something heavy settle across my chest, like I was being watched from inside out, like he knew me, or would, if I gave him enough time. I didn't think. I just bolted, off the road, straight into the brush. Branches clawed at my arms, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop. My hands tore open on stones and thorns, blood running cold. I didn't care. I needed to be away from that road, that man, that log. I crashed through a pine thicket and slid down a slope slick with leaf rot until I broke into a clearing just above the highway. I stumbled into the grass, gasping, and looked up the ridge behind me. Nothing moved. Just fog curling between the trees and the long silence that follows when the forest doesn't care you've arrived. I drove home with raw hands and dirt in my teeth, and I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I'd seen a man sitting where he shouldn't, or sitting everywhere at once? That the woods had folded him into their seams and pressed him out again wherever I looked? I tried to forget, but I can't drive that stretch now without catching something just past the edge of my vision. A shape, hunched, sitting at the tree line, never moving, never watching, but I still feel him there, waiting for someone to notice. Story 5. The Creek That Spoke in Sleep. I camped near a shallow creek a few miles outside Bryson City, where the land dips low and the trees grow close, even in winter. I'd gone up alone, looking for quiet. Work had been hell, and I needed to be somewhere no one could ask me for anything. I parked my truck near the old fire road, hiked in a mile or so, and pitched my little canvas tent beside the water. The creek there wasn't much. Just a narrow, rocky ribbon twisting through a bed of moss and shale, its banks crowded by rhododendron and roots. But it ran clear and steady, and that night it caught the moonlight just enough to shimmer. The evening settled with the easy sounds of crickets and fire pop. I ate jerky and cornbread from a zip bag and leaned back against a log, letting the heat roll into my bones. By midnight the fire had gone soft, just coals breathing red under a skin of ash. I must have drifted off right there beside it because when I blinked awake, the woods had changed. The darkness had thickened, quieted. No frogs, no nightbirds. Even the crickets had gone still. Only the creek kept moving. But the sound wasn't right. It wasn't the normal whisper of water slipping over stone. It had cadence, rhythm. At first, it just sounded like words caught in a dream, syllables bubbling up and falling away before I could catch them. I rubbed my face, figuring I'd just woken mid-dream. But the sound stayed, low and strange, like someone trying to speak through a thick blanket. I sat up. The fire was nearly out, and my lantern sputtered on the last of its fuel, casting a dull amber ring on the rocks. I edged closer to the creek. That's when I heard it clearly. A voice, speaking inside the water, not above it, not through it, inside. It wasn't a roar or a trickle, it was broken language, croaked and wet, like someone was lying under the surface, mouth full of stream, trying to speak. It said my name. Not a yell, not a whisper, just my name, spoken plainly in a voice that didn't sound like mine but still felt like it belonged to me. Then more words followed, sentences I didn't want to hear. It told me things I'd thought but never said out loud, grudges I'd nursed, petty cruelties I'd excused. It reminded me of a night in high school I hadn't thought about in years, when I'd let a friend take the blame for something I did. It talked about my mother's last week in the hospital, how I'd found reasons to leave the room, and how, afterward, I told myself those reasons were real. I stumbled back. My boots slipped on the slick edge of stone and I fell hard, cracking my elbow on a root. The water kept talking. It didn't accuse, it didn't scream, it just told, flat, calm, patient. I reached for the lantern, and in its weak flicker, I saw something in the stream. Not shapes exactly, but the suggestion of faces. Not above the water, not reflections. Below, lips opening with the current, eyes that weren't eyes, but voids in the ripple, dozens of them, each moving with the water, each mouthing something I didn't want to understand. I crawled back from the bank, heart in my throat, breath shallow and ragged. I fumbled with the lantern and the thing hissed and went out, leaving me in black so deep it felt like I'd been buried. I couldn't move, couldn't even find the will to get back into the tent. I stayed there, curled tight by the dying fire, hands over my ears. The voice didn't stop, not all night. Sometimes it grew distant, like the creek had pulled it deeper into the mountain. Sometimes it got close, so close I felt the syllables stir the hairs on my neck. It told me things I hadn't even remembered until that moment. Conversations I'd twisted, silences I'd let stretch too long. Every regret I'd buried was dragged out and named. When dawn finally broke, the creek was just water again. Cold, fast, harmless. I stepped close enough to see the stones at the bottom and found no faces, no voices, just the steady sound of current, like it had always been. I packed up fast, hands still trembling, and didn't look back as I hiked out. But I haven't gone near running water since. Not alone, not without something playing in my ears, loud enough to drown the quiet. They say the creek runs underground in places, gets lost under the mountain and resurfaces somewhere else. Locals call it a ghost vein. Some say it carries more than water. Some say it carries voices. After that night, I believe it carries more than that. I believe it carries you if you listen too long. Story 6. The Lantern in the Pines. I was hunting near Black Mountain, a ridge I knew well. High country, steep cuts through pine and shale where deer bed down in the quiet. It was early November, frost clinging to roots, breath clouding with each step. I'd parked near a forestry gate and hiked in before sunup, figured I'd stay until last light and work the slope back toward the truck. The woods were still that day, muffled in a way that makes you tread careful, not from fear, but respect. You don't fill silence like that unless you mean to break something. About an hour before dusk, as the sky turned that cold pewter color, I saw a light swinging through the trees. Not a flashlight, not a headlamp. It was the warm, steady pulse of an old kerosene lantern, amber and low, bobbing with a rhythm that said someone was walking slow, uphill, deeper into the timber. At first, I thought it was another hunter, maybe someone who'd gotten turned around or started late. I called out, a short, "Hey there," like I always do when I spot someone unannounced. No answer came back. The lantern just kept moving, slow and steady, staying just far enough that I couldn't make out the person holding it. I followed. Something about it felt wrong, but I followed anyway. The glow pulled at me like a thread in the dark. The ground got rough quick, shale shifting underfoot, deadfall catching my knees. The lantern bobbed ahead, ducking behind tree trunks and lifting again like it was weaving through the forest with purpose. I kept thinking I'd see whoever it was step out from behind a tree, nod maybe, say they were fine. But no one did. Just the light, always ahead. At some point I realized I'd passed the same fallen pine 3 times. The bark had been peeled away on one side, exposing pale wood striped with lichen, and each time I looped around it the lantern was there again, just uphill, like it had moved while I blinked. My boots slipped hard on a patch of wet stone, and I sat down with a grunt, cold seeping through the seat of my pants. That's when I noticed the silence. No owls, no breeze, just the soft hollow thump of my heart in my ears. I listened harder and felt the stillness push back. The lantern stopped. Just ahead, maybe 20 yards away. It didn't bob anymore. It hovered, steady, like it had been set down or suspended. I called out again, quieter this time. Nothing. I stood up slow, brushing moss from my hands, and took one cautious step forward. And then the light moved. Not away, not forward. Behind me. I turned fast, and it was there, closer now, maybe 10 feet, floating just above the slope, casting long shadows on the tree trunks behind it. I never saw who held it, never heard a footstep, but I felt watched in a way that made my skin tighten. It wasn't fear, not right away. It was something quieter, like the woods were waiting for me to understand something I'd missed. I didn't run, I didn't even backpedal. I just turned and started walking downhill, calm but firm. The way you leave a place you shouldn't have entered. The trees seemed taller now, and the slope sharper. The light didn't follow, but I could feel it close behind, like breath warming the back of my neck. I didn't find the road that night. I wandered longer than I want to admit, until the trees gave way to scrub and I saw the faint silver of a creek I recognized. I followed that until I hit gravel, then blacktop, then finally my truck. My hands shook so bad I dropped the keys twice trying to unlock the door. I told myself it was nothing, some other hunter playing a game, maybe an old gas lamp someone left swinging from a limb. But it didn't swing right. It moved like it had purpose, like it was leading me somewhere or drawing me in. I don't hunt that ridge anymore, haven't since. But on fog-heavy mornings, when the mist presses through the pines and the world narrows to 100 feet of quiet, I swear I see it again, that faint glow just beyond the reach of vision, always uphill, always waiting for me to follow. And sometimes I feel the urge to, not fear, not curiosity, just the pull of something unfinished, just beyond where I dare to look. Story 7. The Footsteps in the Old Orchard. My aunt's house sat at the edge of nowhere, tucked up against a ridge behind hot springs where the land folded in on itself, and the cell signal gave up trying. She'd lived there since I was little, a widow twice over, stubborn as river rock and twice as quiet. Behind her house stretched an old orchard, apple trees gone wild with time, trunks hollowed with rot, and branches clawing into each other like they'd grown restless. I never liked the place. Even in daylight, something about it felt overgrown in the wrong way, like no matter how far the trees bent under their own weight, they still kept reaching for something. I was staying with her for a week that fall, helping patch shingles and haul in wood before the first frost. On the third evening, I wandered out with my camera just before dusk, hoping to catch some soft light through the dying leaves. The orchard sloped gently down into a dip where fog collected even when the air was dry, and the apples lay rotting in the grass, smashed, worm-bitten, sunken. I stepped careful, snapping photos of trunks gone soft in the middle, bark curling back like dried skin. There was a beauty to the decay, I'll admit, that quiet kind of sadness you find in places left to fall apart. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow and even just behind me, close enough that I could feel them echo through the soles of my boots. I turned quick, thinking my aunt had followed me down without a word, but the orchard stood empty, just me and the trees, fog clinging to the lower trunks like breath held too long. I waited, held still. Nothing moved. Then I started walking again. The steps followed. They matched mine exactly, beat for beat. When I paused, they paused. When I turned my head, they stayed just out of reach. The sound didn't come from one direction. It wrapped around, close and low, like something stepping carefully through the same wet grass I was. I spun again, camera clenched in my hand, but the orchard stayed still. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. I tried to laugh it off, told myself it was an echo or my own boots brushing leaves, but my chest was tightening in a way I couldn't ignore, the kind of tension that doesn't come from logic but instinct. The orchard didn't feel empty. It felt like I was being walked with. I turned to head back. That's when the apples started falling. One hit the ground near my feet with a thud, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. They weren't dropping from above. No rustle of branches, no movement overhead. It was as if they were being thrown from the shadows, one after another, hard enough to dent the ground. I started walking faster. The footsteps sped up to match. I didn't run at first, not until I passed a tree I knew I'd walked by already, one with a branch curled in the shape of a hook, and realized I'd looped the orchard without meaning to. The ground hadn't changed. The trees leaned the same way. I could still smell the vinegar-sweet rot of old fruit. That's when I ran. Branches tore at my sleeves and raked my arms. Apples thumped around me, bruising my legs. And still the footsteps followed, never rushing, just keeping pace like they had all the time in the world. My breath came ragged, my vision blurred. I broke through the tree line with a gasp, and didn't stop until I hit the porch. Behind me, the orchard went still. I turned. Nothing moved. But the grass just at the edge, where the last of the trees met the yard, it was flattened, like someone had stood there a moment too long, watching me from the edge. My aunt didn't ask why I came in pale and shaking. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she'd heard them too. She just handed me a mug of cider and sat with me in silence until the sky turned black. I didn't go back down after that. Not once. Still, every fall, when the apples start to rot and the ground softens with the change, I think I hear those steps again. Low, patient, walking the orchard like they're waiting for someone to join. And some nights, I dream I never made it out, that I'm still down there, circling under the trees, hearing a second pair of footsteps just behind mine, always following, never seen. Story 8. The Hollow That Wouldn't Let Me Out. I was cutting through a hollow near Wise, trying to shave 2 miles off my walk back to town. It was late afternoon, and I figured I had just enough daylight to make it if I kept my pace up. I knew the ridgeline well enough, had hunted it with my cousin when we were younger, back before he moved out west. But I'd never taken the hollow trail. It looked simple on the old map I kept folded in my jacket. Just a dip between ridges that connected back to the main road. At first it was like any other path. Narrow, leaf-choked, sloping down between pine and oak. The sun slipped in at angles, gold through the needles. My boots found their rhythm, and I let my mind drift. But not long after I passed a twisted dead oak leaning across the trail, the air began to change. Heavy, like a basement after rain. The silence came slow, folding in behind me. No bird sounds, no chipmunks darting off trail. Just my steps and breath and the crunch of last season's leaves. The ridge walls grew closer. I could feel them on either side, steepening more than I remembered from the map. And then I saw the dead oak again. Same lean, same limb, split down the middle. I stopped, frowning, and looked around. I hadn't turned or doubled back. I was sure of it. I pressed forward, blaming my nerves, but the air kept thickening like walking into syrup. My watch had a compass built in. It was spinning, the needle twitching in little circles like it couldn't find purchase. I walked faster. The trail dipped, then rose, and each turn showed me the same crooked tree, the same bend in the roots. I started to sweat, though the temperature hadn't changed. My legs were beginning to ache from the climb that shouldn't have been a climb, and the light, somehow, wasn't fading. The sun stayed caught just above the ridge, frozen in place. I checked my watch again. The second hand ticked twice, then stuttered, then spun. I called out. Nothing answered, not even echo. The sound fell flat, like it had been swallowed. My heart was pounding now. I veered off the trail, trying to cut through and break the pattern, but the brush closed quick, thick with thorn and greenbrier, and I was forced back onto the same trodden path. I passed the oak again. My breathing turned sharp. There's a kind of panic that builds quiet. Not the kind that makes you scream or run blind, but the kind that hollows out your chest and makes you small, like the world has curled in on itself and left you stranded inside. I kept walking. I don't know how long. The trail turned to mud in places, then dried again. The leaves underfoot never changed. Same colors, same rot. I marked a stone with the heel of my boot, dragged it sideways to scratch it, but the next turn brought the same stone again, unmarked. I don't know what made me stop finally. Maybe it was the way my legs started shaking without effort, or the strange taste in my mouth, copper and moss. I dropped to my knees, breath catching, and whispered, "Please." It wasn't a prayer, it wasn't to anything, just a word that came up from somewhere low and scared. I kept saying it, quieter each time until I couldn't hear myself. And then I was on gravel, just like that. Knees cut and dirty, one hand still clenched in leaves, but the forest had changed. The trees stood further back. The trail behind me was gone, swallowed in scrub. The sun had dropped at last, a pink thread across the horizon. I stood slowly, dizzy, and turned to see where I'd come from, but there was no trail, no hollow, just woods. I walked out to the road in silence. No cars passed. My watch was dead. I didn't look back. Folks say hollows are like pockets in the hills. Some run shallow, some go deep, some catch water, others catch things harder to name. I think I walked into one that didn't want to let me out. I think it nearly didn't. Even now, sometimes, I feel it, like I'm still turning that trail in my sleep, caught on a loop under the earth, walking past that same crooked oak, forever just one turn away from leaving. Story 9. The Woman Standing at the Bend. It was late, later than I meant to be out, but the storm had slowed me down somewhere near Clay County, and I'd missed my turn off the highway. I figured I'd cut through the back roads, loop around, and hit 11 by midnight. That stretch of gravel past the old mining trail always made me uneasy, but it was quicker. The rain had come in hard and sudden, slicking the windshield, turning ditches into rivulets, and making the trees lean in close, their black limbs tangled like they were trying to block the sky. I'd rolled my window down a crack just to keep from fogging, and the smell of wet pine and diesel clung in the truck like breath. I was maybe 15 minutes from town when I hit the bend. Sharp right curve, no reflectors, just gravel and runoff, and fog moving across the ground like spilled smoke. That's where I saw her. She stood in the ditch off the right shoulder, barefoot, soaked, hair pasted across her face like it had been there a long time. Her clothes were thin, the kind you wear in early fall, not the kind that keeps you warm in a downpour like this. I slowed instinctively, hand easing toward the window switch, thinking maybe she was hurt, maybe her car had broken down farther up, but something in me curled. Her face wasn't right, not because of the rain, not because of distance. It was like it wouldn't hold still, like my eyes tried to focus but couldn't find where her skin began. Everything about her was blurred, not like motion blur, but as if the shape of her didn't belong where it was. She stepped forward, not rushed, not frantic, just one slow step toward the road, and I felt my foot jam the gas. My truck jerked forward hard enough to slide a little on the gravel, the tail end kicking out. I straightened it and didn't look back for at least a mile. When I did, her shape still stood in the road, centered in the rear view, just outside the range of my taillights. She hadn't moved, but I felt the weight of her gaze in my chest like a stone. The rain didn't seem to touch her, just pass through like it didn't know she was there. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, or what should have been a face, hovering just behind my eyelids. I kept hearing the soft splatter of wet gravel over and over, as if someone barefoot was walking in place just outside my window. I told myself it was nothing. Fatigue, rain, the weird way headlights play tricks on the eyes. But I knew better. It wasn't the first time someone had seen her. Years back, a kid from the next county hit that same bend too fast. His car flipped into the ditch where she stood. Folks said he wasn't drunk, wasn't speeding, but his foot had mashed the gas like he was trying to outrun something. He didn't make it. That was before they fixed the culvert, back when the road still dipped too low in rain. Some say he saw her too, others say he was the first one she came for. Depends on who you ask. I didn't tell anyone at first. What was I gonna say? That I saw a woman with a face that wouldn't stay put, that I felt followed for weeks afterward, like her shadow stuck to my tires. But strange things started happening, small at first. My truck's passenger door would unlock itself while I drove, even though the switch hadn't moved. Once, I found my glove box open with an old receipt folded into the shape of a star, something I'd never done. Another time, my rearview mirror was tilted upward, pointed at nothing but roof. But the worst was the dreams. Every one of them put me back on that same bend. Always raining, always dark, always too late. Except in the dream, I never pressed the gas. I stopped. I rolled the window down. I asked if she needed help, and she looked up. Her face was mine, not exact, not a mirror, but close enough that I woke up choking on my breath, heart hammering like I'd run a mile uphill. And in the seconds after waking, I swore I still heard footsteps on the gravel, soft and slow and steady, moving away from my door like whoever was standing there had changed their mind. I started avoiding that road, wouldn't take it even in daylight. But I'd still pass through Clay County now and then, and every time the rain hit the windshield just right, I'd catch a glimpse of her in the corner of my eye, standing at the bend, waiting. I think she wasn't looking for a ride. I think she was looking for someone to recognize her, someone who could finally stop and see her face for what it was. Not blurred, not ruined, but unfinished. and I think she thought it was me.